smacked my Navy brother, threw me against the hood, and cuffed me. Then 6 words on his radio stopped him cold. 2 days into command, someone left a handcuff key on my desk. No note, just the small silver key sitting square in the middle of the green blotter, catching the light from the window when the sun came up over the fuel pier. I knew whose it was before I picked it up. There's only one person on that installation who would have wanted to say something to me and not been able to find a single word to do it with. So he had left the key instead, which was, if you knew how to read it, an entire sentence. It said, "I know what I did." It said, "I do not know how to say it." It said the thing our family had never once been able to say out loud, which was, "I was wrong about you, and I have been wrong about you for a very long time." I sat down in the chair that had my title on the placard behind it, commanding officer, and I turned that key over in my fingers, and I let myself remember the gate. Let me take you back to the gate, because that is where you have to start. It was a Tuesday, a little after 1900, the light going long and gold across the lot the way it does in early August, and I was driving a rental sedan I had picked up at the airport 4 hours before. I had my orders in a manila folder on the passenger seat. I had flown in a full day ahead of my report date because I wanted to see the command the way it ran when it was not expecting the new skipper. You learn more in an unannounced hour at the gate than you learn in a week of scheduled tours. I had spent 21 years learning that, in force protection, in anti-terrorism, in installation security, at gates exactly like this one, on both sides of the barrier arm. So I drove up to my own front gate a day early, in travel clothes, in a car nobody recognized, to watch my watch. I want to be fair to him. I have had time to be fair to him, and I have decided to be. The sentry who leaned down to my window did everything the first 11 seconds correctly. He stood off the door at the proper angle. He kept his weapon side away. He scanned the interior before he spoke. His uniform was squared away, his cover was on straight, and his challenge was by the book. Then he saw my face, and everything he had been trained to do went out of him, and what came up in its place was 20 years of family. "This is a restricted installation, ma'am," he said. And then, because he had placed me, and placing me had done something to him, he added, "Turn the car around." His name tape said, Holt. His rate badge said, Master at Arms, 2nd Class. He was 34 years old, 6 years younger than the last time our family had all been in one room, and he was my brother. "Colton," I said. "Ma'am, I need you to turn the car around." "Colton, it's me." He stood up straight, out of the window, and I watched him decide. That is the part I keep coming back to. He had a half second where the road forked, and I saw him choose the fork. Because there was a version of the next 10 minutes where he says, "What are you doing here?" And I say, "I got orders, and we are 2 people who have not spoken in 3 years, figuring out on a gravel apron how to be a family again." That version was available to him. It was right there. He chose the other one. "My sister," he said, loud enough for the 2 sailors at the guard shack to hear, "does data entry for the Navy in a basement, somewhere. She could not get posted to a place like this if she tried for 100 years. He said it the way you say a thing you have said many times, at many dinner tables, to many people, as a joke that always lands because everyone at those tables agreed on who I was. So I do not know what you are running, ma'am, but this is a federal installation, and you are going to turn this vehicle around. I have thought a great deal about why I did not simply hand him my identification and end it. I had it in my breast pocket, my common access card, my orders. 3 words in my command voice and my card through the window, and the whole thing collapses. I could have done it in the time it takes to say it. I did not do it. I told myself, in the moment, that I was giving him a chance to walk it back, that any second now he would look at me and really see me and stop. That was part of it. But it was not the whole of it, and I did not understand the whole of it until much later, sitting with that key in the CO's office. The truth was that some part of me, a part 20 years old and tired, wanted to see how far he would take it. Wanted, for once, a witness. Wanted the version of me the family had built to finally run into a wall it could not talk its way through. So I said the wrong thing. I said, quietly, "Check the reporting aboard log, Colton." That was a mistake, and I knew it was a mistake the instant it left my mouth, because to a sentry who has already decided you are a problem, Anything that sounds like you know the building is a threat. It means you have done your homework. It means you might be exactly the kind of person a gate exists to stop. His hand came off the window frame. Step out of the vehicle. I put the car in park. I turned it off. I put the keys on the dash where he could see them, palms visible, everything slow and legible, because I had trained 1,000 young sailors on exactly this, on how a body should move when it does not want to be misread. And I moved my body that way now, for my brother, who was not reading me at all. I stepped out. I stood where he told me to stand. And Colton Holt, my father's son, put his hand between my shoulder blades and turned me into the side of the rental car, and my cheek came down against the sheet metal, still warm from the day, and he took my right wrist and then my left and put them behind my back, and I heard the cuffs come off his belt, and I heard the first ratchet close, and then the second. Behind me, one of the young sailors at the shack laughed, the short, uncertain bark of a laugh a person gives when they are not sure a thing is funny, but the biggest man present seems to think it is. That is where I am going to leave the gate for a minute. Cheek on the warm metal, wrists behind me, my own brother's knee, light against the back of my thigh to keep me pinned. A boy laughing at the guard shack, and the evening going gold and ordinary all around us, as if nothing at all was happening. I am going to leave it there, because before I tell you what came over the radio, you need to know who was actually in those handcuffs. You need to know it the way the gate did not. The woman against that car was a commander in the United States Navy, 21 years in uniform. I had spent the bulk of my career in the exact business that Gate was performing badly. Physical security, force protection, anti-terrorism. I had run the security department for a strike group. I had written the access control plans that watchstanders like my brother executed. I had stood more gate watches as a young officer learning the deck plate than he had years in the service. And the folder on the passenger seat of that rental, the one he never asked to see, held a set of orders that named me the commanding officer of the installation whose gate I was cuffed against. I was, in the most literal sense the Navy has, about to become my brother's commanding officer. I was going to be the name on his evaluations, the signature on his leave, the final word on his career. And he had just thrown me into a car in front of his watch and called me a basement clerk. I did not feel triumphant about that. I want to be honest because it would be a cleaner story if I told you a bolt of righteous electricity went through me. It did not. What I felt, cheek against the metal, was a very old and very specific tiredness. Because I understood, in that moment, that being right was not going to fix anything. It was only going to be true. And I had been quietly, invisibly right about a great many things for a great many years, and it had never once bought me a brother. The reason I did not fight was not fear, and it was not strategy, though it looked like both. It was training so deep it had become instinct. I knew exactly how a scared sentry escalates. I knew that the only variable I controlled was whether I gave him a reason. So I gave him nothing. I made myself the calmest object in the situation. I have taught that to hundreds of sailors. The size of your response is not the measure of your strength. Very often it is the measure of your fear. Colton was afraid, though he would not have called it that. He was afraid of the version of me that could show up at his gate and be more than the story he had told about me for 20 years. So he was making very sure I was less. I had better reasons than most to be calm at a gate, because I had built an entire life around gates. Not the metaphor, the actual gates, the barrier arms and the badge readers and the concrete barriers set at the angle that makes a truck slow down whether the driver wants to or not. That was my trade. I had spent the first decade of my commissioned life learning the deck plate of physical security, standing the watches I was now watching my brother stand, on piers and at pedestrian gates and in the small hot booths where a 20-year-old decides, 40 times an hour, who comes onto a federal installation and who does not. I had been the ensign nobody looked at. I had been the lieutenant who wrote the access control plan that the chiefs grumbled about and then, quietly, followed because it worked. By the time I made lieutenant commander, I was running force protection for a strike group, which is a way of saying that when a ship pulled into a foreign port and a small boat came off the beach faster than it should have, the plan for what happened next had my initials on the bottom of it. None of that is glamorous. It is the opposite of glamorous. It is checklists and drills and standing in the rain at 3 a.m, watching it exercise you designed to see whether your own sailors will catch the thing you told them to catch. It is 1,000 ordinary Tuesdays of vigilance, so that one extraordinary Tuesday never arrives. My father, if he had ever understood what I actually did, would have recognized every hour of it, because it was his kind of work, downstairs work, the unglamorous holding of a line. But he never asked, and I never told, and the word office work sat over all of it, like a tarp over a running engine. So when my brother put my cheek against the warm metal of that rental car, I was not a lost civilian who did not understand what was happening to her. I was a person who had trained the trainers who trained him. I knew the escalation ladder he was climbing because I had written a version of it. I knew that the single most dangerous thing I could do was give a frightened young sentry a reason, and I knew that the second most dangerous thing was to sound like I knew the building, which I had already foolishly done. So I went still, and I stayed still, and I let the system I had spent 21 years serving do the one thing I could not do for myself, which was tell my brother the truth in a voice he was required to obey. None of this was new. That is what I most want you to understand before we go back to the cuffs. The gate was not an accident of one bad evening. The gate was the family, compressed into 10 minutes and handed a set of handcuffs. We grew up in a mill town in the Pacific Northwest, in a house that smelled of cedar and machine oil, and our father, Russell Holt, was a Navy man to the center of his bones. Retired boatswain's mate, he had a chief's hands and a first class's pay grade, and a lifetime of opinions about both. He loved the Navy the way some men love a church, and he raised us inside that love, and he had one blind spot inside it that shaped everything that came after. He believed the Navy had a downstairs and an upstairs, and that our family lived downstairs, and that downstairs was the honest place to live. The wardroom, he told me once when I was 17 and had said the word, officer out loud at the dinner table, is not for people like us. He did not say it cruelly. He said it the way you tell a child the stove is hot. He meant it as protection. He had watched officers his whole career, watched them come and go while the chiefs held the ship together, and he had decided that the people who did the real work were the people who did not wear the stripes, and he was, in 100 cases, he had personally witnessed. Correct. He was also teaching his daughter that the thing she wanted was above her station, and I heard it, and something in me set its jaw. Colton heard the other half of it. Colton was 6 years younger, and he adored our father with the total, uncomplicated love of a boy who is being handed a clear map of the world. Dad taught him knots at the kitchen table, taught him to splice line, taught him the names of things and the weight of them, and taught him, without ever saying it in a sentence, that the highest a person could honorably reach was where their father had reached, and that anyone who reached higher had probably forgotten where they came from. So when I took the ROTC scholarship, when I commissioned at 22, when the stripes started going on my sleeve, the family had a word ready for it. The word was office work. Whatever I did, wherever I was, however the collar devices changed, it was office work. It was Regan being fancy. It was Regan upstairs. My mother said it with a kind of nervous pride she did not know what to do with. My father said it with disappointment he never bothered to hide. And Colton grew up saying it as a joke, because in our family, the way you loved your father was by agreeing with him about me. I remember the last time we were all in one room, and it was still good. It was a summer, years back, before any of the hard things, and I had come home on leave, and my father had a project in the garage, an old outboard motor he was bringing back to life, and Colton was out there with him with grease to the elbow, the two of them talking in the shorthand of men who have taken the same things apart 100 times. I stood in the door for a while and watched. My father looked up and saw me, and there was a flicker of something warm, and then he said, "Regan, you would not want to get your nice clothes dirty." And he turned back to the motor. I was wearing an old college sweatshirt and jeans. There was nothing nice about my clothes. He just could not place me in that garage anymore, and rather than sit with that, he handed me a reason to leave. And I took it, because taking it was easier than the fight, and I went back inside and helped my mother with dinner, and I told myself it did not sting. It stung. That was the pattern, laid down early and set hard. There was a place in that family for a person who stayed close, who worked with their hands, who did not reach past the county line, and there was no place for the other kind, and I had turned out to be the other kind, and rather than let that be a thing we simply were, a family with 2 different children, my father made it a verdict, and my mother made it a worry, and my brother made it a punchline. And I, wanting to be loved by them more than I wanted to be known by them, agreed to be the punchline. For 20 years, I chose being loved at over being known, and I told myself it was the mature choice, the generous choice, and maybe some of it was. But a great deal of it was just cowardice wearing the coat of generosity. And it took me most of my life and a set of handcuffs to be able to say that plainly. I let them. That is the thing I have to own. For 20 years, I let them keep the story because correcting it always cost more than swallowing it. You cannot explain a career like mine at a Thanksgiving table. You cannot say, "No, I do not do data entry. I write the plans that decide whether a bomb gets close to a pier," without it sounding like exactly the kind of upstairs bragging that would prove their whole case. So I said, "It is going fine," and I passed the potatoes, and I let Reagan in the basement live on, because she kept the peace, and peace, in our family, was the only currency we had ever managed to hold on to. And then came the hard year, and the story I had been letting live became a story I could not kill, even when it was killing me. Our father got sick in the fall of 2019. It was the slow, cruel kind, the kind that takes the mind before the body, and by the following spring, he needed a level of care the family could not give at home and could not begin to afford. I was a commander by then. I had the pay grade and the savings, and, more than that, I had the distance that let me do the one thing I was actually good at, which was to see a problem clearly and solve it without needing to be thanked. So I paid for it. Quietly. I called the facility, the good one, the one an hour up the coast with the garden he could see from his window, and I set it up in my name, and I told the billing office to send everything to me and nothing to the house. I did not tell my mother. I did not tell Colton. I told the facility that as far as the family needed to know, insurance was handling it, because I knew my father. I knew that if Russell Holt found out his upstairs daughter was paying for his care, it would take something from him that I was not willing to take. It was cheaper for me to be the daughter who was not there than to be the daughter he owed. So I chose to be the one who was not there. I chose it on purpose, and I did not tell a soul. Colton was there. I will always give him that, and I gave it to him even when we were not speaking. Colton drove up that coast every weekend for a year and a half. Colton sat with him. Colton learned the names of the nurses and brought the good coffee and held our father's hand through the parts that are too hard to describe to someone who has not done it. Colton did the work of a son, the real, downstairs, hands-on work our father had raised him to believe was the only work that counted, and he was magnificent at it, and every weekend he did it, the family story about me got 1 degree truer in their eyes. Reagan is not here. Reagan is upstairs somewhere. Reagan sends a card. Then, in the summer of 2021, our father took the last turn, and I was on the other side of the world. I cannot tell you, even now, exactly where I was or exactly what I was doing. That is not me being dramatic. It is the nature of the assignment I was on, which was time-sensitive, and which I had been ordered to, and which did not have a pause button for a family emergency, and which I could not describe to my mother when she called, and could not describe to my brother, and cannot fully describe to you. What I can tell you is that when the call came that he was going, I was somewhere I could not leave, doing something I could not name, and I made the request to come home through the only channels I had, and the answer was no, and there was no appeal, and I sat with that no in a place 10,000 miles from that coastal garden, while my father died with my brother holding his hand and my chair empty. I have been asked by the very small number of people who know the shape of that story whether I resent the assignment for what it cost me. I do not. That is the part that is hardest to explain to a civilian, and it was the part that was hardest to explain to my family, which is why I never tried. When you put on the uniform, you sign something you cannot unsign, and the thing you sign says that there will be days when the Navy needs you more than your own life does, and that you do not get to choose which days those are. Most people never have one of those days. I had one, and it fell in the same week my father was dying, and both of those things were true at once, and neither one canceled the other. I did the job I was ordered to do. I did it well. And 1,000 miles of ocean away, a man who had spent 30 years in the same uniform I was wearing let go of the world without knowing that the daughter he thought had abandoned him was, at that exact hour, keeping the kind of promise he had spent his whole life teaching us to keep. There's a bitter symmetry in that which I have made my peace with, though it took years. My father raised me to believe the mission comes first. Then the mission took me away from his deathbed, and he died believing I had chosen myself over him, when in truth I had chosen exactly the thing he taught me to choose. He never got to know that. I will carry that particular stone to my own grave. But I have stopped pretending it is a stone I picked up by accident. I picked it up on purpose, the day I raised my right hand, and I would raise it again. What I could not forgive myself for a long time, was not the missing. It was the silence after. It was letting my mother believe the cruel version, because the true version was inconvenient. That one was a choice I did not have to make, and I made it anyway. And it is the one I spent the next 5 years paying for, without knowing I was paying. I missed the funeral. I could not explain why. And my mother, in her grief, said the truest untrue thing anyone has ever said to me. She said it on the phone, 3 days after, in a voice scraped down to the bone. "Your brother buried your father," she said. "Where were you?" I said I was sorry. I said I could not talk about where I was. And I heard, in the silence on the line, the exact moment the story about me stopped being a joke and became a verdict. Reagan was not there. Reagan chose upstairs over her own father. Reagan sends a card. I let it stand. God help me, I let that one stand too, because the alternative was to make my grief-blind mother carry the knowledge that I had been paying for the garden the whole time and had been forbidden from coming home. And I could not do that to her on top of a fresh grave. So I became, in my family's final accounting, the daughter who did not come. Colton became the son who stayed. And those two facts hardened into stone over the next 3 years, and we did not speak, and the last thing my brother knew about me for certain was that when it mattered most, I was not there. That is who was in the handcuffs. A woman who had spent 20 years being smaller than she was, so the people she loved could feel bigger, and who had paid a price for it she was forbidden to mention, and who had finally, foolishly, driven up to a gate hoping to be seen, and who had gotten, instead, exactly the version of herself she had spent 2 decades building. So, back to the gate, cheek on the metal, cuffs closed, the boy laughing at the shack. What ended it was procedure, not a rescue, not a hero, not a stroke of luck. The system worked the way a system is supposed to work, and it worked, despite my brother, rather than because of him. There was a first-class petty officer running that watch, the watch supervisor, and her name was Renata Cho, and she had been watching the whole thing from the door of the guard shack with a stillness that I recognized, because it was the stillness of a professional watching an amateur make a mistake in slow motion. When Colton cuffed me, Petty Officer Cho crossed the apron. She did not say anything to him. She bent down and looked at my face, and then she said, to me, in a completely level voice, "Ma'am, do you have identification on you?" "Breast pocket," I said, against the metal. "Left." She took it out. She read it. I watched her eyes go across the card and then across the orders folded behind it. And I watched 20 years of my brother's story die on Renata Cho's face in about a second and a half. She straightened up. She keyed the radio on her shoulder, and she raised the command duty officer, and she said, "Quarterdeck, gate 1, I need the CDO on this net, now." And the CDO came up, a lieutenant commander named Theo Marsh, whom I had not yet met, and who had become one of my most trusted officers, and his voice came out of the radio on my brother's shoulder. The radio clipped 6 inches from Colton's ear, and it said 6 words. "Stand down, Holt. That's the CO." I have been in a lot of quiet moments in my life. That gate went to a quality of quiet I had never heard before, and have not heard since. It was the quiet of 8 people all doing the same piece of arithmetic at the same instant, and all arriving at the same catastrophic answer. That's the CO. The woman my brother has in handcuffs against a rental car is the incoming commanding officer of this installation. She's going to run this base. She's going to run us. I felt Colton's knee come off my leg. I felt his hands on my wrists, and they were not steady, and it took him 3 tries to get the key into the first cuff, because his hands had started to shake in a way that a man cannot fake and cannot stop. The first cuff came off, then the second, and I stood up off the side of the car, slowly, and I turned around, and I rolled my shoulders once to settle them, and I looked at my brother's face. I will not describe it in detail. There are things you do not do even to a person who has just wronged you. And one of them is to catalog their worst moment for an audience. I will only say that it was the face of a man watching the floor of his entire life drop away, and that some very small and very tired part of me, the 20-year-old part, felt for one ugly second exactly the vindication I had driven up to that gate half hoping to feel, and that I have never been less proud of a feeling in my life. Because right behind it came the rest of it. The staff car, headlights swung across the apron. The outgoing commanding officer, Captain Eleanor Trask, whom I was relieving, had heard there was a situation at the main gate and had driven down herself with the command master chief, a big, quiet, iron-gray man named Dwayne Whitfield, to see what it was, and now the two most senior people on the installation were stepping out of a staff car onto an apron where a master-at-arms second class stood next to a set of open handcuffs and the woman who was about to be his skipper. Captain Trask took it in with one sweep of her eyes. She was very good, she said. "Commander Holt, I presume?" And she put her hand out, and I shook it, and I said, "Yes, ma'am, I apologize for the timing. I came in a day early." "So I see," she said. And then, more quietly, so it stayed among the four of us at the center of it. "Do you want me to have him relieved of the watch?" And there it was, the trap laid out clean and generous and terrible. Because Captain Trask was offering me the easy thing, the correct thing, the thing that any watching sailor would have understood and approved. Relieve him. Write it up hard. A watchstander had laid hands on and detained a commissioned officer, the incoming commanding officer no less, in front of witnesses. That is not a small thing. That is a career-defining thing. And Colton had earned every ounce of the consequence, and I could have it delivered with one nod. And I would come out of it looking exactly like what a new CO should look like. Untouchable, fair, not to be tested. But here's what I had learned in 21 years, standing where Captain Trask was standing and where Dwayne Whitfield was standing with his careful, reading eyes. To be seen as fair, I would have to be untouchable, and to be untouchable in that moment, I would have to end my brother. The two had been welded together by the last 10 minutes. Everyone on that apron expected me to use it, and Colton, standing there with the cuffs hanging open in his shaking hands, expected it most of all. He had spent 3 years certain I resented him for staying, for being the good son, for being there when I was not. And now I had been handed the perfect instrument of exactly the revenge he was sure I wanted. He was waiting for it. He had already, I could see, accepted it. He thought this was the day the upstairs sister finally reached down and settled the account. "No," I said to Captain Trask. "Do not relieve him tonight. Let him finish his watch." Whitfield's eyes moved to me and stayed there, and I felt him revise something. Trask raised one eyebrow a quarter inch, which on her was a shout. "Chief Cho has the watch supervisor's log," I said. "Have her document it exactly as it occurred, no softer and no harder. Route it through the chain the way any incident routes. I am the reporting senior on this installation as of my report date, so I am going to recuse myself from any adjudication involving this sailor and delegate it to the executive officer and the command master chief. I want it clean. I do not want anyone able to say it was buried, and I do not want anyone able to say it was vengeance. Document it straight and let it walk." Trask looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, and I saw that I had, without meaning to, passed a test she had not told me she was giving. "That will do, Commander," she said. "Master Chief, ride with the CDO. Chief Cho, secure the log and hold it for the XO." She turned back to me. "Walk with me to the car. You have had a longer evening than you planned." I walked, and behind me, my brother stood at his post and finished his watch. 4 more hours of it, alone with what he had done, which was, I have come to believe, a heavier consequence than any I could have written, though I had not chosen it as a punishment. I had chosen it because I did not know yet what I wanted. And when you do not know what you want, the discipline is to do nothing you cannot take back. Relieving him would have been permanent. Letting him finish the watch was reversible. So I let him finish the watch. Captain Trask drove me the last quarter mile to the visiting officer's quarters herself, which she did not have to do. For most of it, she said nothing, letting me sit with the evening, and I was grateful because I did not trust my voice yet. Then, near the end, she said, "I have relieved a lot of watchstanders in my time, Commander. It is the easy call, and it is usually the right one. But I have noticed that the officers who reach for the easy call fastest are the ones least sure of themselves. She pulled up to the curb and put the car in park. You are going to be all right here. This command has been waiting for someone who is not in a hurry to prove anything. She looked at me. That was your brother, was it not? It was not really a question. The resemblance is in the jaw. I said, yes, ma'am, it was my brother, and I had not seen him in 3 years, and I had not known he was stationed here until his hand was on my window. She took that in without comment, the way good senior officers take in the things that are not their business, but have just become their problem. And then she said only, then you have a harder few weeks ahead of you than the paperwork suggests. Get some sleep. And she let me out, and she drove off into her last month of command, and I stood in a parking lot on an installation I now owned and did not feel like I owned anything at all. I did not sleep much that night. I lay in an unfamiliar bed in the visiting quarters, and I ran the gate again and again, not the way you replay a victory, but the way you replay a car accident, looking for the moment you could have turned the wheel. I kept arriving at the same place. I could have shown him my card in the first 10 seconds. I chose not to. And the reason I chose not to was not noble, whatever I had told myself at the time. I had wanted him to hang himself with the story. I had wanted a witness, and I had gotten exactly that. And it had felt, for 1 second, like winning. And then it had felt like nothing at all, like putting your whole weight against a door that turns out to be unlocked and falling through into an empty room. I understood, lying there, that I had come to that base carrying a grudge I had not admitted to owning, and that the grudge had gotten what it wanted at the gate, and that it had solved nothing, because grudges never do. They are not in the solving business. They are in the carrying business. For 2 days, I did nothing about my brother. I took command in the ways a new CO takes command in the first days. The walking, the listening, the learning of the deck plate. I learned that LCDR Marsh had a spine. I learned that Dwayne Whitfield had run more good sailors into good careers than any 3 officers on that base. I learned that the story of the gate had gone through the command in about 90 minutes, the way anything goes through a command, and that everyone was watching, with the total attention sailors bring to exactly one question about a new skipper, which is, what is she actually made of? Not what does she say she is? What does she do when she has power and a grudge and a clean shot? I knew what they expected. I decided to disappoint them because the thing they expected was too small. I want to be careful here because it would be easy to make myself sound wiser than I was. I did not arrive at the decision cleanly. For 2 days I went back and forth like a boat with no rudder. There was a morning I woke up certain I was going to let the full weight of it fall on him, every ounce the regulations allowed, and tell myself it was only fairness. There was an afternoon I was equally certain I would find some quiet, administrative way to make it disappear and tell myself that was mercy. Both of those were lies I was trying on to see if they fit, and the reason neither fit was that both of them were still about me. The heavy hand was the 20-year-old at the dinner table finally getting to slam it down. The vanishing hand was the same 20-year-old still desperate to be liked, still trading the truth for peace. I had been that person for 2 decades, and she had never once made me happy, and I was tired of taking my orders from her. So I threw both of those versions out, and what was left, when they were gone, was very simple and very hard. Treat the sailor exactly as I would treat any sailor, no lighter for being my blood, and no heavier for having wronged me personally. And treat the brother as a brother, once, in private, with the truth. Keep those 2 things separate and do them both. The command would handle the sailor, I would handle the brother. And I would not let either one contaminate the other, because the moment I did, I would become exactly the kind of officer my father had spent my childhood warning me about, the kind who confuses the stripes with the person wearing them. I did not want Colton punished, and I did not want him spared. Both of those were about me. Both of those were the 20-year-old part of me still trying to win an argument at a dinner table with a father who was in the ground. What I wanted, when I finally found the bottom of it, was for my brother to know what he had actually been guarding against all those years, to know the shape of the thing he had thrown against a car. Not so he would owe me, so he would finally, for the first time, see me, and then we could decide, both of us, as the adults we now were, whether there was anything left worth building. So on the third morning, I told the yeoman to find Master-at-Arms, 2nd Class Holt, and have him report to the commanding officer's office at 1000. Not to mast, not with a representative. Off the record, sister to brother, once. I cleared the office. I told the yeoman to hold my calls. He came in at 1000 exactly, in his working uniform, cover in his hand, and he stood at attention in front of my desk, eyes locked on the wall behind me, jaw set, waiting for the blade. He looked terrible. He looked like a man who had not slept in 3 days, which he had not. "Sit down, Colton," I said. "I would rather stand, ma'am." "Sit down. That is not the CO talking. That is your sister, and she is asking you to sit down." He sat, barely, on the front 2 inches of the chair. I did not give him a speech. I have thought since about all the speeches I could have given. The 20 years of them I had stored up, and I am glad I gave none of them. Instead, I took a folder out of my desk drawer, a thin one, and I slid it across the blotter to him, and I said, "Open it." He opened it. The first page was a care facility statement, one of dozens, itemized, the good facility an hour up the coast, the garden he could see from his window. The account name at the top was mine. The next page was another. The next was another. 2.5 years of them. He turned the pages slowly, and I watched him understand, page by page, that the garden he had sat in with our father every weekend for 1.5 years had been paid for the entire time by the sister who was not there. "You paid for all of it," he said. He did not look up. "The whole time? You never said." "Saying it would have made it a debt," I said. "I did not want him to owe me. I did not want you to owe me. I wanted him to have a garden and a nurse who knew his name, and I wanted you to have a father to bury who did not know his upstairs daughter was footing the bill, because I know exactly what that would have done to him, and so do you." He turned to the last page. It was a copy of a set of orders, most of it blacked out, the way those things come, but with enough left visible to show the dates that ate the funeral. He looked at the dates, and then he looked at the black bars over everything else, and he was a master-at-arms. He knew what a document looked like when a person was not permitted to say more, and I watched the last piece of the family's story about me come apart in his hands. "They told me you did not come because you did not care," he said. His voice had gone very rough. "Mom said, for 3 years, that you picked your career over him, over us." He put the folder down on the desk very carefully, as if it might break. "You could not come." "I could not come," I said, "and I could not tell you why. I still cannot tell you most of it. What I can tell you is that I made the request to come home through every channel I had, and the answer was no, and I sat with that no on the far side of the world while you held his hand. And there has not been a day since that I have not been grateful it was you in that chair, because if it could not be me, there was no one on this earth I would rather it have been." He did not fall apart. I want you to know that, because it is the truest thing about him, and it is the reason I knew we would be all right. He sat with it. He sat with it the way our father had taught us both to sit with weather, upright, silent, letting it pass through without pretending it was not happening. And that was harder to watch than tears would have been, and it was the first fully honest moment between the two of us in more years than I want to count. After a while, he said, "I put my own sister in handcuffs." "You put a stranger in handcuffs," I said. "You had decided who I was a long time before that gate. The handcuffs were just the day it finally had somewhere to go." "That is not better." "No," I agreed. "It is not better, but it is truer, and true is where we have to start." He left the folder on my desk. I noticed, and I did not mention it. And the next morning there was a handcuff key in the center of my blotter and no note, because my brother is a downstairs man in the way our father raised him, and downstairs men do not have the words, they have the acts, and the act he had for me was to hand me, in silence, the key to the thing he had done, which meant I am the one who locked it. Let me be the one who says I was wrong. The rest of it moved the way these things move. The incident was documented straight, exactly as I had ordered, no softer and no harder. It went to the executive officer and to Master Chief Whitfield. And I kept my word and my hands off it. And Colton received a consequence that was real and that he had earned, a formal counseling and a documented mark that he carried on his record. He did not fight it. He did not ask me to make it go away, and he knew by then that I would not have, because the same thing that made me refuse to end him at the gate made me refuse to rescue him at the desk. What is fair does not bend either direction for family. I think he understood that. I think in a strange way it was the first time in his life he had been treated by me as an equal instead of as our father's favorite, and I think it landed as respect, which it was. The command watched all of it. The command saw a new CO get handed a grudge and a clean shot on her second day, and declined to take it, and then declined just as firmly to let her own brother slide. And I have commanded long enough to tell you that you cannot buy that kind of trust, and you cannot fake it. You can only earn it once in public by doing the harder right thing when the easier wrong thing is sitting in your hand. The gate, which my brother had meant as my humiliation, became the foundation of my command. I did not plan that. I want to be clear. But I have learned to notice when a wound turns, without your permission, into the exact thing you needed. I called my mother that weekend. That was the hardest conversation, harder than the gate, harder than the folder. I told her the truth, the parts I was allowed to tell, and I did it gently, because she was going to have to carry a new version of the last 5 years, and grief that is already grieved one way does not turn easily. I told her about the garden. I told her I'd been forbidden from coming home and could not say why. And there was a long silence on the line, and then she said in a small voice, "Why did you let me say those things to you? All those years. Why did you let me?" "Because you needed a son who stayed," I said. "And you had one, and he was wonderful. I could not give you back your husband. I could give you a clean version of the family where somebody was there and did it right. So I let myself be the one who was not there. It seemed like the cheapest thing I had to give." She cried then, and I let her, and I did not try to fix it, because some things do not need fixing, they need witnessing, and I have finally learned the difference. Before we hung up, she asked me one more thing, and it undid me more than anything else in that whole stretch of days. She asked in a voice gone very young, "Did he know? At the end, did your father know how much you loved him?" And I told her the truth, which was that I did not know, that I would never know, that the not knowing was the price, and I had paid it and would keep paying it. And she said, "He knew. A mother knows what a father knows. He knew, Reagan." I do not know whether she said it because it was true, or because she needed it to be true for both of us. It does not matter. It is one of the kindest things anyone has ever done for me, and she did it 3 days after learning she had grieved 5 years in the wrong direction, and I will not forget it. There is a thing that happens in a command when the sailors decide they trust the person in charge, and it does not announce itself, and you cannot make it happen on a schedule. It is a change in the air. The reports come up a little straighter. The problems come to you a little earlier while they are still small enough to fix. People stop managing you and start working for you. I felt it move through that installation in the weeks after the gate, and I knew where it had come from. It had come from a master-at-arms second class who threw the new skipper into a car and then watched the new skipper decline to destroy him and also decline to save him. The whole command had been handed a perfect view of exactly what I would do with power and a grudge, and what I did was neither of the two things they expected, and that told them more about me than any speech I could have given at quarters. Master Chief Whitfield came to my office about a week in, on some small pretext, a form that did not really need my signature, and after I signed it, he stood there for a moment. And then he said, in his slow, careful way, "For what it is worth, Skipper, I have watched a lot of officers get tested in their first week. Most of them either come in swinging or come in scared. You did neither." He put his cover back on. "The chief's mess noticed, thought you would want to know." And he left, and I sat there for a while because a command master chief does not say a thing like that lightly, and I understood that I had, without campaigning for it, been accepted by the one group on that base whose acceptance actually runs the place. I want to tell you, it was all repaired in that phone call, that the folder and the key and the truth washed 20 years clean. It did not. That is not how any of it works. What the truth did was stop the bleeding. It did not heal the thing. Healing is slower and less dramatic, and it happens on Tuesdays. Here is a Tuesday. 3 weeks after the gate, I was walking my own perimeter at night, the way I still walk it, past the main gate under the sodium lights, and I stopped in the dark outside the arc of the lamp and watched my brother work a watch. A young sailor had come up from the lot, a new check-in, a kid of about 19 with a sea bag too big for him and the specific terror of a person who has no idea where anything is or who anyone is. And I watched Master-at-Arms Second-Class Holt come out of the shack, and I braced, out of a habit only 3 weeks old, for the version of my brother I knew. That is not who came out. Colton walked over to that terrified kid, and he took one end of the sea bag, and he said something I could not hear that made the kid's shoulders come down out of his ears, and he walked him up from the lot to the quarterdeck, carrying half his load, telling him, I imagine, where the galley was and who to see and which chief to never be late for. He carried a stranger's bag up from the lot. Nobody had carried mine. And I stood in the dark and understood that my brother had decided, without an audience and without being told to become the kind of man who carries the bag, and that this, not the counseling, not the key, was the actual consequence and the actual repair, because it was the one he had chosen himself. I walked my own perimeter a great deal in those weeks. It is a habit from a lifetime in the trade, the need to see the edges of a thing with my own eyes. But it was more than habit then. I would go out after dark, in a ball cap and no insignia, and walk the fence line and the lots and the lanes, and I would end up, most nights near the main gate, standing outside the arc of the sodium light where the watch could not see me, looking at the exact patch of apron where it had happened. It was just a lane and a light. That is the strange thing about the places where the important moments of your life occur. They do not know. The apron did not know. It went on being a piece of pavement with a barrier arm over it, and cars went through it all night, and none of them knew that a family had cracked open and started, very slowly, to knit back together on that spot. I thought a lot on those walks about the difference between winning a moment and healing a thing. I had won the moment at the gate. There was no question about that. 8 witnesses, a radio call, a staff car, my brothers shaking hands. If winning the moment were the point, I had won it as completely as a person can. And it had bought me nothing. Not one thing I actually wanted. Because what I had wanted, underneath 20 years of pretending I wanted nothing, was not to be proven right in front of a watch. It was to be known by my own brother. And you cannot win that in a moment. You cannot win it at all. It is not a contest. It is a slow, patient, unglamorous act of building, downstairs work, my father's kind of work, done with your hands over a long time, and it does not care in the slightest how right you were at any gate. We had our first ordinary phone call not long after. Not about the gate, about nothing. About his wife Kayla, whom I had never really known, and whether I would come to dinner. And I said yes. Over the phone he taught me a knot. Our father's knot, the one Dad had taught him at the kitchen table while telling me the wardroom was not for people like us. Colton walked me through it over the phone, right hand, left hand, the rabbit and the hole, laughing at me when I got it wrong. And I sat in the CO's quarters with a length of cord, fumbling a bowline, while my little brother laughed at me, and it was the best 10 minutes I had spent with family in 2 decades. The dinner happened 2 weeks after that. I drove out to their place, a small rented house off base, with a yard Kayla had made something of, and I brought a bottle of wine and the specific nervousness of a person walking into a room where she has been the villain of the story for years. Kayla met me at the door. She had every right to be cool with me, this woman who had married into a family that talked about me the way ours had. And instead she took my hands and said, I have wanted to meet the real one for a long time. And I understood that Colton had told her. All of it, the folder and the garden and the gate. He had gone home and told his wife the true version, out loud, which for a man raised the way we were raised, is a kind of courage I do not think civilians can fully measure. We ate at their kitchen table, and it was ordinary, and ordinary was the miracle. Colton had made our father's chowder, the exact recipe, down to the too much pepper, and when I tasted it I had to put my spoon down for a second. And Colton saw me do it and did not say anything. He just refilled my water glass, which was our father's move. The small physical kindness in place of the words nobody in our family ever had. Later, out on the back step, while Kayla did something in the kitchen, Colton said, not looking at me, I keep thinking about you sitting on the other side of the world getting told no. I keep thinking about what that was like. Being ordered to stay while he did not finish it. He did not have to. I do not know how you carried that alone. I did not carry it well, I said. I just carried it quiet. Those are not the same thing. It took me a long time to learn they are not the same thing." He nodded. And then he said the thing I had waited 20 years to hear and had long since stopped expecting, and he said it plainly, the way you state a fact about the weather. "I was wrong about you. I was wrong about you my whole life." And I did not make it into a moment, because he would have hated that and because it did not need to be a moment. I just said, "I know. Thank you for saying it." And we sat on the step in the dark and did not talk for a while. And it was enough. We did not get the 20 years back. I want to be honest with you all the way to the end. Those years are gone, spent, paid out in silence, and no folder and no key buys them back. What we got instead was a Tuesday, and then another Tuesday, and a dinner, and a knot, and a brother who carries the bag. I have learned to count those. I have learned that they are, in fact, the only thing there ever was to count. So let me leave you with the one thing the whole business taught me, because I suspect some of you are carrying something too, if you have spent years being the family's quiet disappointment on purpose. If you have paid a price nobody knows about and taken a blame you did not earn because it was cheaper than the explanation, if you have decided, over and over, to be smaller than you are, so the people you love can feel like enough, then hear me. You are allowed to put it down. Not for the credit. The credit is not coming, and if you are doing it for the credit, you are doing it for the wrong reason. Put it down for the room it makes. Put it down because a truth carried in secret does not protect anyone half as well as you tell yourself it does, and it costs you a brother. I hid who I was for 20 years to keep a peace that was not really peace. It was just silence, and the silence nearly cost me the only family I have. It took a set of handcuffs against the side of a rental car to finally put the truth on the table, and I would not recommend that method to anyone. Do it sooner, do it quieter, do it before the gate. The truth does not need you to defend it. It does not need a witness or a vindication or a whole watch standing at attention while it lands. It just needs you to stop hiding it. That is all it ever needed. That is all I ever needed to do. The end